can start. So, hi everyone, and hi panelists. Welcome on this roundtable session organized by the IGF Secretariat on the Best Practice Forum Cybersecurity last year. Best Practice Forum that was focusing on securing access to the internet and protecting core internet resources in context of conflict and crisis. My name, I'm the moderator, I'm Wim Dugzelle. I have been supporting the Best Practice Forum last year as a consultant for the IGF Secretariat. And so that's why I'm moderating the session today. But maybe just in 2 words, a best practice forum of an internet governance forum. I mean, you're all familiar with the IGF, but the best practice forum is actually one of the intersessional activities of an IGF meeting. That means it is an activity that starts in between the traditional cycles. It gives the opportunity to gather stakeholders to work on a specific topic and have discussions in function of then later the IGF meeting itself. The positive thing is that you can focus also on a topic and do a little bit more than just that one session at the IGF. The result, and you can see it there on the screen, is of course at the end of this this year of the cycle, we can present and publish a report. Just before we start, I wanted to say that the work of the BPF in 2025 was coordinated by Valeria Betoncourt, MAG member and MAG member for APC, and also co-coordinated by Anne-Reet Esterhuizen, also from APC. Anne-Reet and Valeria said it there, they wanted to be here. They were planning to be at RightsCon, but of course, at such a short notice, you can not change this travel. But before we kick off, I also want to especially acknowledge Article 19 and Access Now and Kaspersky, because they that were 3 people. Of course, their organizations, but there were 3 people that were really invested in the work last year and helped to actually create the report. A brief outline of the session today. I will start with just very similar, say what we discussed at the IGF and at the Best Practice Forum, and literally with the idea to throw that in front of the panel. The aim of the session is not to brief or to reproduce or present every detail with it at the Best Practice Forum, but it's really to get input from the panelists. And I also wanted to mention the people here on the panel, they were not involved in the BPF work. So that's why we really want to have this panel as hearing from them input, feedback and ideas on how we move forward. I think that's the most important as input. Like I said, the aim of the session just mentioned is to build further on what we do, to create ideas for that. Similarly, there was a session planned at RightsCon at the end of the week, but as you all know, that has been cancelled. But that is actually what we try to do with the output of this Best Practice Forum. Now see how the discussion can go further. There are plans, there is a proposal and waiting for confirmation to continue within the IGF best practice cycles. But also, as you see, it's the idea that the discussion can move on outside of the IGF cycle. Now, moving to the substance of the session. Like we said, we have had this topic of securing internet access, civilian internet access, and critical internet resources during conflict and crisis as a topic for a Best Practice Forum last year. But the discussion within the IGF also goes further back. The year before, there was a main session and I'm pretty sure if you go back before, you will have similar topics. So In the Best Practice Forum, we started with looking and try to define what is actually the challenge. The question was asked, there was a call for input. Is this really a problem? Is this an issue we have to look at? Or is this something that has already been taken care of, but we don't see it? And the feedback we received was, yes, there is really an issue. And we look around, the last year was particularly, if you looked in different wars and conflicts, where you, even on the daily news, saw issues and then say, okay, there are questions around this topic. So it is a challenge there, and there is no clear framework in place, or place, at least not known to us, where you can go for a solution or for a way forward. Also, what was flagged, we are talking in a multi-stakeholder context. It is important to start to identify the stakeholders who can be involved and who can work on the issue, who can help either with preventing that, or problems, preventing that in a conflict the access is civilians don't have access anymore, or other issues with the infrastructure. The last point on the last year's work, so we had this informal initial discussion. It moved to conceptualizing 3 focus areas, 3 work areas, where further work needs to be done. One is the creation of a multi-stakeholder emergency mechanism. That really is intended, or the idea is a place where different stakeholders can connect and organize a quick reaction. If there is a conflict situation and there needs to be a solution, then different stakeholders can work together, or at least can contact each other. And it's a pity, because that was actually the focus of the session on RightsCon, the group that was trying to organize, or was organizing at the end of the week. So that is the first. A second point that was flagged is there needs to be more work or more discussion on applicable legal and regulatory frameworks. An example that is giving is the human rights and international human law framework, where they say, well, there is overlap, there are gaps, but there is no clear discussion. The idea is, if there are, with the right people, stakeholders in the room, maybe after some work, some discussion, we can come to more clarity or more simple conceptualization there. And the last focus area was actually, if you look and step a little bit back, and you need to look into a broader governance approach of the whole issue, because one thing is, if there is a conflict, if there is a breach of, if there is a problem with the access for civilians or infrastructure, to have immediate action, but actually you need to start earlier. You need to have that whole governance approach that you prepare before there is even a conflict, that you know what to do if there is a conflict situation and an issue there, and that you also organize what to do afterwards in rebuilding. Having this broader approach should also look at, for example, socio-economic factors that play a role. So it's time for me to shut up. I said the report is there. The link to the report you can find on the IGF webpage. And then I would like to turn to our panelists. And like I said in the introduction, the aim of this panel discussion is really to get a better understanding of how they all come from different stakeholders, different organizations, how they look at the issue, get their feedback on how the BPF dealt with the issue, but most important also for us to understand, do they play a role? What role do they play for themselves, their organizations, and so on, to move things forward? I suggest that we maybe do a quick round of presentations of the panelists. At the far end, we have Olivier Allais, I think, of the Telecommunications Standardization Bureau of the ITU. Then we have Kylie Giro. Sorry. Then Kylie Giro from the Cyber Peace Institute. Then we have, you were the first on the list, that's why I missed you. We have Anna Kruip from UNDR, so the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Agency, if I have that right. Ashutosh Kadash from Microsoft. And then last, Ambassador Ernst Noorman from the Netherlands. We start with Anna, please.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to see all of you here. As you heard, I'm with UNDR, which is a UN lead entity for the coordination of disaster risk reduction, and with that also the custodian of the Sendai framework, which is like the intergovernmental framework on disaster risk reduction, basically global roadmap to reduce disaster losses. And maybe just a few words about our organization. Not everyone might be aware. We work across 5 regional offices with governments, with civil society, with the private sector, and we deliver through convening, capacity development, advocacy, and guidance. And our priorities kind of for the next few years, I think, connect quite well with the challenge at hand. It's like risk knowledge is helping governments and communities understand the risk they face, and really with a big focus on prevention and preparedness. As you say, like that in the moment disaster strikes or conflict starts, and like stakeholders are aware where populations are at risk and which services are at risks. Then our second priority is locally led disaster risk reduction, to really focus on the community side, financing and recovery readiness to kind of prepare for the rebuilding. And maybe, just briefly for this introductory round, but I think from a DRR perspective, internet access and also other digital services are really now essential services. And they belong in national strategies for disaster risk reduction with the same priority as sectors like water, energy, and transport. And while we work a lot with like natural hazards, I think there's quite a few lessons that can be discussed and could possibly be kind of translated to other contexts. Like, for example, in many countries, there are so-called situation rooms where different stakeholders come together and have like a set mechanism that just kind of needs to activate once disaster strikes to coordinate response and to make sure that these essential services that include internet access are kind of upheld. And then in my day-to-day work, I focus a lot on early warning systems, which I think is also really a good example on the importance of internet access for the safety of the general population. If an alert cannot be sent, if a data center is offline, then of course the early warning system would have failed. And it really starts with integrating those risks very early in the national disaster plans. And I'll be happy to talk a bit more about like our work on resilient infrastructure, on stress testing that infrastructure, but I'll keep it at that for that introductory round. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping it short. And you mentioned one point that I remember came up also in the discussions we had, is like there are, if you look around, systems how to react on a natural disaster, for example, only it doesn't seem to be that ready fixed there in terms of when you really look at internet access. Then we'd like to go to your neighbor, Olivier, please.
Yes, thanks a lot. Olivier Alès from the ITU. So for these discussions, I would like to focus on 2 connected dimensions of ITU work. The first one, it's the support to countries whose telecommunication infrastructures have been affected by conflict and crisis, and also about technical standards and integrating human rights into technical standards. In Palestine, ITU assistance focus on coordination, recovery planning, and capacity building. We have been working on these contributions for about 2 years now, and so we have an intersectoral task force. We have also a specific trust fund for Palestine. And it's something that we are implementing with the Palestinian Ministry of Telecommunication and Digital Economy. ITU is also coordinating with the UN Emerging Telecommunication Cluster. And on practical measures, it can be satellite phone for Gaza, for example, damage assessment, digital skill support, and connectivity planning. In Ukraine, ITU assistance focus on monitoring, coordination, technical assistance, resource mobilization, and also capacity building. So the priority are extending internet access, connecting schools and medical facilities, strengthening also institutional capacity, and supporting also the telecom operators. We are also supporting Ukraine on cybersecurity and on ICT infrastructure in general. Currently, we have the ITU Council. It started last week, and also is going on this week. And we have an interesting proposal brought by Iran, and which still at the discussion stage, and to try to rebuild also the broadcasting and telecommunication ICT infrastructure. So it is on the table. Maybe the ITU Council are going to take a decision on Friday on this specific proposal. After I can talk more about my work at ITU, at ITUT. It's about human rights and technical standards. And it's coming because technical standards are not neutral. They shape how technology affects rights such as privacy, dignity, equality, accessibility, and non-discriminations. Over the past 2 years, that we have been working on this specific subject. We have been raising awareness internally. It was quite important. Also, internal survey. It was also important to see how people are understanding human rights and technical standards, the comparative studies. And we discussed that subject in different forums. A couple of numbers. The internal survey that we did in the different study group, 84% of the respondents say that human rights are relevant to the standardization work that we are doing at ITU, but 40% they don't know how to, they have no familiarity with human rights. So they have the sentiment, the feeling that it is something important, how to implement human rights into the standardization process. Most of them, they have no idea. So here's the main challenge that we are facing at ITU. It's really the translation of human rights into technical terms. What does that mean when we are building a standards about optical fibers, human rights? What does that mean when we are developing a specific standard on AI and AI bias? What does that mean to embed human rights? So it's what we are working right now, and especially with member states, and what we expect to do at ITU, it's to bring this subject in a specific working method group, and which is going to review the methodology to implement how to implement human rights into the standardization process. So we are at that stage at ITU, trying to see how we are going to embed human rights into the standardization process, which one we are going to consider, and how we are going to translate these human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then we go to Kylie, please.
Yes, thank you. I hope it's the right level to talk. So I'm Kylie, work for the Cyber Peace Institute, as you said. For those of you who are not familiar with the Cyber Peace Institute, we're a nonprofit based here in Geneva, whose mission is to secure nonprofits. So essentially it's an NGO securing NGOs. So I'll talk more about the bit of the second half of this panel's title, which is more about protection and security. Essentially, we cannot really protect what we don't understand. And so a lot of our work, of course, is to assist NGOs in practical terms with cybersecurity expertise, but a lot of it is as well to track cybersecurity attacks against civil society organizations, to better understand them and to better be able to expose them and raise accountability in the space. And since 2018, we have actually recorded 850,000 cyber-related attacks on civil society organizations. And now to bring the conflicts aspect, because this is the title of the panel, since 2022, we started recording attacks in Ukraine in the context of the conflict. So those are data really on attacks, again, critical infrastructure that are essential to the survival of the civilians. I'm taking one example. For example, right at the start of the invasion of Ukraine, there was an attack on the Viasat satellite network, and that disabled the internet. And so that's pretty obvious. But one thing that we got into a challenge very quickly is in cybersecurity. Traditionally, we were measuring harm and like the effects of cybersecurity attacks in financial terms. You will often see, the cybercrime costs tens of thousands, billions. You with Microsoft next to me will have the right number, but it's often financial economics, and we were really missing a methodology to be able to measure the harm of these attacks against civilians. What does it mean? We know what it means for a business, but what does it mean for people when a hospital cannot function, when you no longer have, electricity in your home, but your grandmother relies on a machine that needs electricity? All these are not financial. And so we very quickly built a harms methodology that was able to measure those. And now all the data that is still tracked in the case of Ukraine, and it's available publicly online on our website, is also matched against that new methodology. It enables us to really contextualize the data that we collect and apply it to indicators that are geographical impact, or more like human impact, but what that means really more specifically. So that's one thing that I would bring to this panel.
Thank you. And then we move to Microsoft.
Thank you very much. So, as the private sector in the room, I guess, we get faced with this issue of access to internet from multiple methods, right? I think the question before us is no longer whether internet is critical during crisis or conflicts. I think so that my previous speakers and all of us understand that it's beyond debate. The real challenge is actually for all of us, how do we safeguard this in times of crisis or conflicts, right? How do we ensure that civilians continue to get access to the internet and the services thereof, which become extremely critical from a human rights and humanitarian perspective? And I think that's what underpins everything that we're talking today, right? So, for example, access to humanitarian assistance, health services, financial transfers, early warning systems, as UNDR was talking about, are critical. And more importantly, independent information. If I am caught in the middle of a crisis situation, I need to know what's happening. You talked about the financial impact of the internet not being there on business. I think so the social, economic impact and the psychological impact of the absence of getting access to information is far worse than, and I don't know how we can actually add a number to that, right? And when connectivity is interrupted or disrupted, whether through physical damage or cyber operations, internet shutdowns, or even overtly broad, restrictions which are applied by administrations, right? The consequences, the first people to face the consequences are actually the citizens and the civilians, and not the security forces, because more often than not, security forces have backup plans in place for connectivity and for information. From our perspective and from Microsoft's perspective, I think so there are three fundamental principles possibly that we look at. The first being the public core of the internet, whether it is, which includes routing infrastructure, DNS, undersea cables, trust networks, they need to be protected. Their fragmentation or weaponization undermines not just affected regions, but also the stability of the internet and everything that goes along with it. The second is blanket internet shutdowns and indiscriminate takedowns are actually blunt tools. Evidence does suggest that such blanket requirements don't protect security. They actually undermine security. They destroy trust, and they actually create more problems than what they can. And finally, cybersecurity responses, even in emergency contexts, must remain anchored in what all of us have talked about, international human rights and humanitarian law. We cannot move away from that, which means that access to the internet is not just an operational issue. It is something which is deeply anchored in human rights and humanitarian law. It's deeply anchored in the fact that access to the internet will enable access to humanitarian services, etc. For example, as Microsoft, we have a team within Microsoft which is called the AI for Good team, or a lab. What it does is, in times of crisis, climate disasters, etc., it uses satellite imagery, looks at how populations are moving, provides that information to people on the ground, governments on the ground across disaster areas, to make sure that first responders know where to go and respond to. Now, that's vital information. If that's not made available in times of disasters, you will suffer. Whether it's floods, whether it's heat waves, whether it is forest fires, wherever it is, we have seen that impact. The second thing is UNDR is part of that. The UN's Early Warning for All initiative, which is a coalition of 4 UN agencies getting together to provide early warnings on disasters. That's another thing which requires the internet as critical infrastructure. So fundamentally, we need to look at access to the internet not just as a human right, but also as critical infrastructure. And we need to look at ways and means by which we need to protect it, prevent its destabilization in times of crisis or conflicts. Either ways, it doesn't matter.
Thank you. And thank you also for mentioning the public core, because I think that's a nice connection to our next panelist, Ambassador Norman.
No, thank you very much. So my name is Ernst Norman, Cyber Ambassador of the Netherlands, and great to be in a panel of all different stakeholders, and from my side representing government side. And I just want to come back indeed on the word public core of the internet, because there was actually a concept introduced in 2015 by our National Scientific Council. Dennis Broeders, many of you know him. He drafted a document, a research paper, and introduced that concept of public core. Also public good. We should secure the open, free, and safe access to the internet. And that in that respect, I also follow you on that one. It should be part of our critical infrastructure and it should be protected at all times. Also referring to the internet shutdowns, also extremely important topic, for instance, for the Freedom Online Coalition, which we created with a number of partner countries in 2011 already. And unfortunately, we saw last week the decision taken in Zambia, how important this Freedom Online Coalition still is, to work together, multi-stakeholder cooperation, to protect the human rights online. It's very unfortunate that, of course, it didn't go ahead, the RightsCon, because also Freedom Online Coalition would have had sessions there to discuss the protection of the internet online, human rights online. I'm also asked to say a few words on the involvement of stakeholders and why it's so important. When I started in this present capacity about 3 years ago, I was wondering, at first, why all the time talk about multi-stakeholder involvement? Like it was almost like a kind of religion. I was coming also from the world of multilateralism, so that was, and now everything was multi-stakeholder. So then I understood, I was explained also by many of the stakeholders involved, the network, the internet consists of 40,000 different networks, and actually no one owns it or everyone owns it. Depends how you look at it. So if you want to discuss on the future of the internet, you need everyone involved in that discussion, how to keep it open, safe, and secure. But it's also very important to understand that reason if we discuss it with countries like China, for instance, who feel that it should be a government affair, why we really feel that it should be something owned by all of us. And it's not an easy thing. It's easier said than done that we have to involve all stakeholders. But if you looked at the, for instance, discussion at the open-ended working group till last summer, when it was time to give the floor to the civil society in the private sector, the room was empty. I mean, it was an opportunity for the national delegations to go and have a coffee, to have some bilaterals, and let the other one speak. That is not multi-stakeholder involvement as we see it. It should be a true involvement. And I think the IGF is one of the examples, and also one of the few examples, where we truly see a broad discussion of all stakeholders involved. So that's why we've also been defending always the continuity of the IGF with the WES's +20 review, because that's such an important asset to have, actually, to really sit down together with everyone. At the same time, we have to keep on looking at the multi-stakeholder model, because all stakeholders are not as strong at the table. I mean, if Microsoft sits at the table, and unfortunately they are very actively involved in this discussion also at UN level, they can be everywhere because they have capacity there, they have the funds to do it, and that's not the same level if they sit together with the Cyber Peace Institute, for instance, which is much smaller and more vulnerable, and then you have many local NGOs as well. So we have to keep on analyzing how to evolve in that. We agreed a couple of years ago, I think in 2024, on the Sao Paulo multi-stakeholder guidelines. That was during the Net Mundial in Sao Paulo. And I think that also provides a sound basis to further evaluate how to ensure the strong multi-stakeholder participation in the future. And we as governments play a strong role in that to ensure that the involvement, that we all at different UN levels, and now with the global mechanism, it's an important topic, how to involve different stakeholder discussions, but also at other levels. We see it as our responsibility to do it. But also government should look at local level. It's not something also an international level. How do you do it nationally? And we have a National Cybersecurity Council, and that is multi-stakeholders, co-chaired by private sector and government. It has academic sector involvement, civil society sector, and all at the highest levels as an example to the rest of society. And I think you should preach, you should do what you preach, practice what you preach. That's the one. So that's also what you have to do at national level to show that you're really serious on multi-stakeholder participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will look into the room now to see if there are any comments or questions. I don't know if there's anything happening in the chat. Okay, just wait because we have the opportunity. Looking again in the room. Thank you for the panel, this first round of introductions, which allowed us to see a little bit where you stand, where your organizations stand, and how you look at the topic. I would like to get it back to the work of the BPF itself and ask you again, do you have the feeling that we cover everything, that we cover the picture, that we say, look, we need to look, if we continue this discussion, we need to look into how to react immediately, and it is really important that you have the different stakeholders together. We need to flag out that more legal discussions, so that maybe, of course, it's and maybe a question B is there from how do we look at it in the current geopolitical context in the last year? Because I think a year ago it was easier to say we need to work towards that more uniform or that more clarity on the interpretation of humanitarian law, human rights law in this field. I think at the beginning of 2025, the answer to that question would have been different than at the end of 2025. So also that, and then the third part, that we need more that encompassing discussion. So that would be my question: is if you look back at the work, the Best Practice Forum, does it cover everything? Does it are there points that are missing, or should there be a fourth or fifth focus point, or is some part of this work already being done somewhere? No particular order. Who wants to go first? Okay.
All right. So no, I think the three framings that the BPF has seem to be great. But what I'd like to sort of double down a little bit is on what all is possibly covered there, right? And I think you talked about it. The multi-stakeholder emergency mechanism, I think, is going to be critical. Response mechanism, and especially if I can just off the cuff, and this is not a well thought of thing, but it's just reacting to your geopolitical, in the current sense of the geopolitics that we have right now, actually having a multi-stakeholder conversation is even better, because then from the same geography, while a certain administration may not be favorable, there could be the chances that the industry and or the civil society may actually step up into that. So that multi-stakeholder governance, multi-stakeholder emergency mechanism, creating that is going to be extremely critical. The second thing is the legal and the regulatory frameworks that we're talking about. There's the international human rights law, there's the humanitarian law, there are national laws, everything is there. But I think the problem is not if the laws are there or not, or what's right or wrong, but it's the applicability of those laws and the operationalizing. And that is something which I think international organizations and the IGF can actually bring to bear very, very strongly. That's an important piece. Clarifying these legal and regulatory frameworks. And the third is obviously, I think, so we all talked about it, the governance framework. Who does what? When does it happen? How do you control it? And what are the reflectives that you create, or the gates that you create before something can happen? So if a takedown has to happen, how does it need to happen in a very concerted fashion? And that's where I think so the governments have a clear role, the private sector has a clear role, the technical society has a role, civil society has a role in making sure all of us are true to this perspective. So I think the three pillars, or three, whatever we call them, seem to be fine. It's just that we need to double down in terms of what we talk about over there.
Very clear about that.
Thank you. I agree with everything that you just said. We'll just add first on multi-stakeholderism. I think the internet, you need to define the roles and responsibilities of each. At this point, it does look like responsibilities are so fragmented that we are at the point of paralysis, which obviously we don't want. And when you add conflict on top of it, then we're all very much in reaction mode as opposed to preparation mode. So we need a plan that comes ahead of crisis and not just react when the crisis occurs. And I think that's the point of having the forum anyway. So that's good. And now you have a lot of best practices that have occurred. Some actors have stepped up to do some things. I mean, I've talked about methodologies, I've talked about frameworks, and so you can take all of this and apply them to. So mapping all of these best practices is probably the next steps, and is already ongoing because we're here and having this conversation. And then agreeing on who does what as well in terms of prevention. The private sector, they can do a lot more in security by design. Which will help in a time of crisis because the infrastructure itself will be more resilient. And civil society can also be a bit more agile, and their government have been very helpful in making sure that we get the resources we need to operate with more agility. And I'm thinking in particular of the Common Good Cyber Fund, which was set up last year and will have its first open call for application in June. And essentially, the Common Good Cyber Fund's mission is to sustain civil society organizations with critical missions to secure the internet and secure the most vulnerable. And so that comes at a point where we were all very much struggling with resources because of certain administrations who have cut down their funding. So I think people do step up, and you can map all of these. And on the second point, on the legal framework, existing law applies. For the things that I've mentioned earlier, an attack, on that occurs on a satellite network, and then all the internet's shut down. The infrastructure that touches on the hospitals and the electricity grids and all that is protected and probably should be more vigilantly protected. And there are, again, some initiatives, to mark, like the digital emblem from the ICRC. It's a good example to make sure that infrastructure online are as protected as they are offline. I'm citing an example that already exists. So norms are there. The problem, of course, is on the internet, because everything's so interconnected, it's always hard to measure all the consequences and attach them to that action. So that remains, and further methodologies are needed, to make sure that the intentions behind were not disproportionate with the attack. So that's probably more research there needs to be done, and as well for the governments, how do you ensure that public core is protected as a common? Will need more research. I think a lot of the commons research at the moment on the internet are on the internet infrastructure and on the digital public good, but not so much on the cybersecurity aspect.
Thank you.
I also agree with what the other panelists said, and I think just maybe to not repeat, but point out a few points, also reacting to what colleagues said in their opening statements. So for once, I think just like as a practical example from our work, we have like a methodology on resilient infrastructure stress testing that is not limited to digital infrastructure, also covers other areas, but that has been implemented in, I think, 10 or so countries, with like pretty specific follow-up reactions to that. Like, for example, Madagascar, that led to like new resilience standards specifically for telecommunications and energy, and also in other countries that really has kind of led to like showing where the vulnerabilities lie and what can be done to prepare that. So that is the first point that I think is something we can look into. But the second point being to like really point out the honest gap. This was like designed with natural hazards in mind. So it's not always applicable. It's not the same situation when the failure of infrastructure is due to like an attack as opposed to like a storm, let's say. So I think it's really important to look into that. And coming to the point that you made about like the connectivity maps, where we work on like trying to overlay where people have access to telecommunications with where vulnerable people are. These are, of course, things, these data points can be really sensitive in a conflict setting. Like the more we know where certain populations are, they can be targeted as well in a conflict setting. So I think that's right, like a question there where it's really difficult to refine for example, early warning systems, while at the same time kind of keeping that fragile and conflict context in mind. And last point, briefly, and maybe veering a little bit off topic, but just also to say, I think we all agree the digital communications, digital services are essential. But I think even in 2026, we still need to like have redundant communication channels running at the same time, and we cannot abandon radio, text messages, community meetings. Like we had like one study in Somalia where they compared the impact of flooding events in 2-3 years apart, with quite a bit of investment into like non-digital alert services in the meantime, and the population was much better prepared. So I think it's also like that doesn't, of course, take away from the importance, but I think it also really shows that redundancy in communications and like having different channels where that independent information that people need is accessible is still important, even if maybe in Geneva it doesn't necessarily seem that way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe something that we could discuss in the best practice forum also could be technical standards, because I don't see, because technical standards are not governance, And we have a lot of statements. For example, a couple of months ago, ITU, ISO, and IEC, we have a common statement about technical standard and how it's something important to embed human rights, especially in AI standards. We're working also with OHCHR, so the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, to see how we could embed more human rights into the technical standards. After, I guess something where we could be better as a community, it's most of the time at IGF or even here, we have high-level discussions. And when I am at ITU and I'm talking to the chairs or technician engineers working in the different study groups, they're engineers, technicians, they are not following the high-level discussions. And so they have their own discussion at the technical level, and we still need to build a bridge between the policy and the governance that we are trying to build, and the work of specific technical groups and technical communities. Maybe something, I guess, also important, and in just an example, maybe you remember months ago, we saw that Anthropic make a decisions front of the Pentagon saying, okay, the CEO of Anthropic decides that took ethical decisions and step back front of the Pentagon. And then OpenAI came, I guess that you know the story. And what I realized during that during this, it's that the governance were just bilateral. It was between a big tech company and a specific government. And here it's more a call at the member states that we need to bring back governance into a multi-stakeholder organizations. And more, especially on AI, I see that the governance of AI are taken by the private sectors, and we need to bring it back to member states and multi-stakeholder organizations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you very much. Well, great interventions, but you started also with the geopolitical situation. And indeed, I mean, if I look at my own ministry and just discussions also in academics and civil society on international law, I mean, the concerns are enormous. Because, you know, I mean, after the intervention, of course, in Iran, everyone said, well, that's breaching international law. There's no base for that. But, you know, more and more we start feeling that what's the value of international law? At the same time, we have to defend and stand for international law. Whether it's online or offline, we agreed on international humanitarian law, and we have to defend it. So that's also a really important part, that even though we see things happening which are not in line with international law, does not mean that it doesn't have value anymore. For us, it's, you know, it's even in our constitution that we have to defend, as Article 93, I think, in our constitution, that we are obliged, every government is obliged to defend international law. So that's also where we stand for. Also, the new government we have since a couple of weeks explicitly mentioned that international law is for them important. So that's, I think, also for online, that we have to keep on working on that one. On the commitment to protect the core, public core of the internet, crucial. Kylie mentioned also the design, secured by design. I'm not a true believer in that it will happen voluntarily. The market forces are too strong, and that's why we as a European Union are preparing the implementation of the Cyber Resilience Act. And that obliges companies to include it from scratch in their products, in their software, in their hardware. And if you don't do it, you can even become liable. And I think that's the only way to go to ensure secure products. Because then you will finally see that actually software and hardware will become mature. Because it happens already for decades with children toys, with medicines, with if you buy a car, whatever product, but not if you buy software. And that should change, that we really have strong protection of the core of the internet and its products related to internet. I'm happy also that we are part of the Common Good Cyber Fund. It was actually launched in the Peace Palace in The Hague initially. So I think it's a very important initiative because it's also, protecting the weaker parts, and that's, for NGOs. But also we have to look at the divide with, capacity building in small countries who do not have the capacity to protect the internet and the public core of the internet to its citizens and organizations. So that's, I think, also a crucial part. Thank you.
Thank you. Then now I'm looking in the room again if there are any questions, or have one.
My question might touch already upon some of the points already mentioned, but if you have something more to add, coming from the microphone. How do we safeguard internet access and infrastructure? Ashutosh just basically he recited the norm to protect the public core of the internet, was developed during the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, and also commenting on how the norm that Ernst Norman mentioned also is based on the Dutch concept of public core of the internet as a public good. What do we need to do to safeguard access and to build commitment to adhere to the norm to not interfere with the public core? Does it require governments to declare internet infrastructure as essential infrastructure? And if yes, are there risks attached to that? For example, in empowering governments to shut down the internet if they think it's necessary.
It's a long question. Somebody wants to?
Well, maybe as a first reaction, what we see is, by defining the internet as a public good, the public core of the internet, it's also at the same time means that we see it as critical infrastructure, and you have to protect it. Actually, also as a government, in that sense, you have to protect, for instance, landing sites of submarine cables coming on site. Same that we, in a way, have to responsibility to protect the water supply. Not in the sense that, you have companies supplying water, but if you see that others are trying to damage it, you have to interfere in that. And the same we do, of course, with our intelligence services, for instance. If we see adversary groups trying to hack critical infrastructure in our societies, we are trying to disrupt these activities. So that's where, but we work together with private sector. I mean, we work together with Microsoft, but also others to defend the internet. But there are certain responsibilities which lie with the governments, but we can do that in cooperation with others to really defend the accessibility of the internet. And it doesn't mean, shutting down. We are very much always against internet shutdowns. So I'm not going to give an example in what case we would shut down the internet. I'm not going to do that.
So I think from our perspective, I think this is a joint responsibility. It's not going to be one stakeholder who protects access to the internet. The government has a role, the private sector has a role, civil society has a role, everybody has a role. From the private sector's perspective, I think one of our fundamentalist thing is to make sure that we create the tools and processes and the development of the internet, as you said, resilient by design, secure by design, and we follow the rules of the land where we operate in. That's the first principle. The second principle, I think, which is very important for the private sector, is that when we do get a takedown request, we make sure it lies within the legal and regulatory boundaries that it's required to lie in, right? So making sure that you take the private sector not only brings the technical heft to ensure that the internet runs in a resilient manner, but also brings the legal heft to question when a takedown request comes out, which is possibly unlawful. And I think that's where the balancing act needs to happen between the government, not at loggerheads, but working together. That's the way one will look at it. And the other piece is, I think, you know, how do we make sure that backups happen? We are the private sector who brings possibly the internet to life from an operational perspective in many senses, right? So how can the private sector make sure that there are backups in place, there is a resilience built in, there is an operational capability built in to ensure that it, you know, it continues to operate in spite of crisis or this thing. But then we also need the other sector, other stakeholders to keep us true to this. And that's where possibly the civil society comes in. And I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. No, indeed, it is a very broad question, and I'll say what you said to start with. It's everyone's responsibility. I think anyone outside of our cyber bubble thinks about the internet, thinks about the big names out there, and I'll point Microsoft because they're just next to me, but it's not it. Microsoft doesn't own the internet. Nobody does. And actually, a lot of very small actors play a very vital role in keeping it up. You have the entire open source community that are keeping some pieces, and civil society organizations that are securing others, you know, like thinking, for example, of the routing protocol, Manners, which is maintained, the secretariat's maintained by a nonprofit, or First, who was here today at the opening ceremony, who makes sure that there's coordination again between first responders. So all these actors play a role. And that's why the first point of the report is so important is how do we ensure multi-stakeholderism? How can we ensure they're all around the table? Because Microsoft and the other big names alone cannot do it because it's not theirs. And a government cannot do it because essentially it's not his. And I will talk about governance in a masculine because I don't know how else. But so it's everyone's responsibility. So there's no straight answer to that question. And so that will be my question. I will now hand over the mic to the next person.
Yeah, I think maybe at this point more in reaction to what a colleague said than the original question. But I think also you mentioned like the kind of open access, but also like looking at the actual infrastructure. And I feel it's always very surprising when you look into like how little it actually is in the sense of like the physical things and how vulnerable they are. Like the other day I was at a conference where they showed around like a submarine cable, and it's very concerning how tiny it is in a way. You really see how it can be damaged. And in that sense, maybe I'll use this opportunity to give a bit of a reading recommendation for a report that's coming out tomorrow on digital risks and how like solar storms, volcanic eruptions, heat waves kind of may trigger like cascading failures across a system that UNDR worked on with ITU actually and Sciences Po in Paris. So I don't have it with me because it's embargoed until tomorrow, but I'll recommend to all of you to have a look once it comes out.
Thank you. For me and for the ITU, I guess, of course, the ITU have a role to play to keep the internet up, especially on the infrastructures. And we are coordinating, facilitating discussion between member states. After we have specific project, I'm thinking about the partner to connect projects initiative, which is really a platform to have member states and IT member to talk and to ensure that we have connectivity on the different continents. We have also project around submarine cables, and we are making the standards also to make submarine cables interoperable. So yes, we have a role to play with some project and also with standards, and to be sure that the internet is still interoperable.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's great if you moderate the session and if the panel starts to self-organize the final remarks and exactly finishes like 30 seconds before the end of the meeting. So, well, thank you very much for the panel. I think one important thing I heard was multi-stakeholder is very relevant, important. Both sides, I heard like make sure that discussions are inclusive so that some discussions don't happen somewhere closed, not known. But an important thing I also picked up is at some moments you need that multi-stakeholder discussion to get things working, because one or two stakeholders are not able to come up with a solution. So thank you all, and hope to see you further involved in the discussion.
Thank you.